What ought we to do? How come it must be? Now it was Sarah, the owner of the restaurant where I worked as a jack of all trades, who was shouting with shaking lips. With a resident pianist performing daily, this restaurant was well known for its live piano concerts. The most well-liked of them was a young, attractive pianist. His outstanding abilities spread via social media and word of mouth, increasing the restaurant's clientele. Then, we were fortunate enough to have a well-known local politician reserve the eatery. The politician even asked for a particular composition since he was so excited to hear the young pianist perform. However, the pianist became utterly silent on the day of the event. I said, "I'll borrow the outfit, Sarah, at this rate." The multi-talented me mustered the bravery to come forward. "I'm 30 years old, and my name is Alex. My place of employment is a renowned eatery that has frequently appeared in upscale publications. The establishment is elegant and refined, even from the viewpoint of an employee. Of course, the decor isn't the only excellent feature. The cuisine is also outstanding. I always get a nice feeling of satisfaction when I watch people smile while they bite into something. Even though I don't cook, I usually handle cleaning and dishwashing, which are the less glamorous aspects of working at a restaurant. When I first started working here, I was given various responsibilities, but I froze up and couldn't perform. Eventually, I settled into the role of handling odd jobs. It wasn't just once or twice that I felt ashamed of myself. Why am I so incompetent? That thought consumed me, steadily eroding my self-esteem. The kitchen staff and wait staffs seemed to shine so brightly to me. Even as they moved about briskly, their faces showed a sense of fulfillment, and their dedication to their work was palpable. And then there were the resident pianists. A grand piano graced the restaurant, and the talented pianists performed daily. Their beautiful classical music matched the restaurant's ambience, contributing to its welcoming atmosphere. The effort they must have put in over the years radiated through their confident performances. Their upright postures and radiant expressions exuded an undeniable charisma. I couldn't help but feel like everyone else working here was out of my reach, standing on a higher plane, especially Michael, the restaurant owner. Not only was he skilled in both the kitchen and the dining floor, but he could also play the piano effortlessly. He was the very embodiment of perfection, like someone from another world. What's more, he was gentle with everyone, always wearing a warm, serene smile. In short, he was a flawless gem of a person, inside and out. He never treated me, the perpetual odd jobs guy, with disdain. Instead, he often spoke to me with heartwarming kindness. "Don't worry, just do your best at your own pace," he would say. Those words saved me countless times. I wanted to repay Michael. He had once said, "Alex, there's something I'd really like you to do." Agreeing to his request would have been the perfect way to return the favor, but I couldn't bring myself to say yes. And so, 5 years passed since I started working here, still stuck in the same role. I kept telling myself to go at my own pace. If I did, maybe one day I'd finally be able to meet Michael's expectations. That thought motivated me to do my best, even in my small way. However, Michael had passed away. He collapsed in the kitchen and was rushed to the hospital, but he never regained consciousness. He didn't respond to the staff's calls by his side, nor did he so much as flutter his eyelids. I couldn't believe it. I told myself that if I went to the restaurant, he'd greet me with his usual smile, just like always. But no matter how many times I showed up for work, he was nowhere to be found. Of course, I wasn't the only one mourning his loss. Everyone at the restaurant wore somber expressions, the weight of grief hanging heavily in the air. The lights inside the restaurant seemed dimmer, even though none of the bulbs were out. The live piano performances continued as usual, but for some reason, the music seemed quieter than ever before. We have to protect the restaurant Michael cherished so deeply. With that thought, the staff devoted themselves to their work, but confusion and a tense atmosphere gradually took hold. It was the arrival of a new owner that brought order to the chaos. Michael's own daughter, Sarah, stepped in to manage the restaurant. Contrary to expectations that she might resemble her father, Sarah's personality was the complete opposite of his. There was no trace of his warm smile. Instead, her face wore a perpetual scowl. She never spoke kind words to the staff, issuing commands in a cold, clipped tone. When I learned she was my age, I initially felt a sense of camaraderie, but her stern demeanor made her seem much older and far more intimidating. One day, "Why are you so inefficient? Please work more effectively." Sarah's sharp voice rang out in the kitchen. She had come to observe the kitchen staff, and finding their methods lacking in her eyes, began demanding improvements. Everyone averted their gaze, unwilling to meet Sarah's eyes. Even Daniel, the head chef, seemed lost for words, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to figure out how to respond. True, this restaurant often took its time with each task, but that wasn't because of inefficiency. It was in line with Michael's philosophy. If we cut corners, the customers will notice. Every step of the process should be carried out with care so everyone who dines here can enjoy the best tasting dishes. Michael often shared those words with us. Daniel tried to explain, prepping, with all due respect, but Sarah didn't listen at all. "It doesn't matter what my father said. I'm the owner now. Forget the old way of doing things and follow my instructions from now on." Her sharp words, paired with a piercing glare, made it clear she wasn't going to change her mind. Daniel, unable to argue further, reluctantly replied, "Understood," his face a grimace of suppressed frustration. From that day on, the kitchen shifted to an efficiency-first policy, but it didn't go unnoticed by the customers. While working, I glanced around the dining area and saw that the once blissful expressions of diners had turned to slight frowns and tilted heads. I even overheard comments like, "It's good, but it tastes a little different somehow." Michael's words echoed in my mind. If we cut corners, the customers will notice. Daniel seemed to be thinking the same, sighing frequently as if resigned to the inevitable. If we kept working like this, the restaurant's reputation might start to decline. One day, as an uneasy atmosphere lingered among the kitchen staff, Sarah gathered everyone together, saying, "I have something to discuss." We all stood there, question marks practically floating above our heads. Sarah stood before us with a young man positioned behind her. His features were so striking he could have been a model, and standing next to the beautiful Sarah, they looked like a perfect picture. "This is Kyle," Sarah announced. "He'll be the restaurant's new resident pianist starting today." With a slight bow, Kyle introduced himself. According to Sarah, he was a graduate of a prestigious music conservatory. His confident posture made that easy to believe, and I nodded to myself in understanding. He raised his head and surveyed the surroundings with great interest. His expression seemed to say, "So this is where I'll be performing from now on." As I followed his slow, deliberate gaze, our eyes suddenly locked with an unmistakable intensity. When his gaze met mine, it locked in place. Flustered, I looked away, but I could still feel his intense stare. What could it mean? As I awkwardly glanced at his shoulders, I realized something. His height and build were nearly identical to mine, like a carbon copy. He must have noticed the same because he openly scrutinized me from head to toe before finally turning his attention back to the group. "Let's have Kyle perform for tonight's dinner service," Sarah declared. Kyle's piano skills were exceptional, earning admiration even from the seasoned staff and other resident pianists. Customers paused mid-bite, captivated by his performance. "Amazing," I murmured to myself, though my words were drowned out by the thunderous applause. It felt as though I had stumbled into a concert hall rather than our restaurant. On stage, bathed in the spotlight, there he was. In contrast, I sat in the dimly lit audience, watching him from the shadows. I let out a bitter laugh, thinking how perfectly opposite we were. A few weeks after his arrival, Kyle's piano skills started gaining attention through word of mouth and social media, bringing in more customers to the restaurant. One evening, Sarah approached me directly. Why are you always stuck with cleaning and dishwashing? There's plenty of other work to do. Ah, the day I had dreaded had finally arrived. Even when Michael was the owner, I could feel the cold stares from the other staff, the kind of looks that seemed to say that it would be totally fine without me. Michael had always been the one to shield me from those gazes, but now that he was gone, I was an oddity in this efficiency-driven environment, sticking to what little I could manage well. I tried to explain that I was just doing the tasks Michael had once encouraged me to focus on. But as Sarah's sharp gaze pierced me, I remembered something not long ago when Daniel brought up one of Michael's policies. Sarah had snapped, "I'm the owner now." It was clear that invoking her father's name would only set her off. Swallowing my words, I instead muttered an apology. "I'm sorry, other work to do." Perhaps my quick apology had softened the blow, as she let me off with just a warning to be more mindful from now on. "Let's get through this pile of dishes for now," muttering to myself quietly so no one could hear. I rolled up my sleeves. As Sarah left, Kyle appeared in her place. Dawn was his usual polished, gentlemanly smile. Instead, he grinned wickedly, the corners of his mouth curling with mischief. I stared wide-eyed at his drastic change in demeanor, only for him to throw a mocking sneer my way. "So I saw you getting scolded by Sarah earlier." It seemed he had witnessed the whole scene. I had nothing to deny, so I simply replied, "You're not wrong." Kyle's grin widened even further. "How lame. What are you even doing at your age?" He's absolutely right. No one knows that better than me. I'm already 30, yet I'm still stuck doing odd jobs. Even Sarah, who's my age and already the owner, scolds me for not taking on more responsibilities. And now, here I am, being mocked by someone younger than me, like Kyle. It's downright humiliating. Unable to come up with a retort, I could only offer a forced smile. But my silence seemed to spur him on, making his words even sharper. "Seriously, why are you just a handyman? And how did someone as useless as you even get a job at this restaurant?" "I'm here because the previous owner." I began to explain, frustrated and determined to defend myself. I thought this might stop the ridicule, but Kyle cut me off with a sneer. "Oh, never mind. You don't need to explain. Your background is just as useless as you are." His words completely derailed my attempt to speak, leaving me with no choice but to plaster on a vague smile and mutter, "You're right." I knew there was no point in continuing. Kyle wasn't the type to actually listen. However, it became apparent that while he had no interest in hearing others, he was eager to talk about himself. "You know," he began smugly, "a valuable background is one that belongs to someone extraordinary, like me." He spread his arms dramatically, like a speaker on stage. "Did I tell you? I graduated as the top student from a conservatory of music." "That's incredible," I said. I wasn't trying to be sarcastic in the slightest. It was genuine admiration that made those words come out. At the same time, a question arose in my mind. Did you ever consider joining an orchestra? With your level of skill, you could make a name for yourself internationally. The moment the words left my mouth, Kyle's demeanor shifted drastically. His face grew tense, and his shoulders began to tremble. His fists were tightly clenched, making it seem like he might lunge at me at any moment. "Shut up, you amateur." Startled, I instinctively braced myself as he shouted angrily and stomped away in an exaggerated manner. Months passed since Kyle had joined the restaurant. Though he had adapted to the environment, his condescending attitude had become his defining trait. In fact, it seemed more accurate to say his mask had slipped, revealing his true nature. He wasn't just mocking me anymore. His scorn extended to Daniel and even the veteran cleaning staff. "Are you seriously charging people for food like this? Is the floor really clean? Why don't you crawl on your hands and knees to check?" His harsh words left the staff fuming, veins visibly bulging on their foreheads. Even when someone retorted, "Don't talk like that," or pleaded, "Stop ruining the atmosphere," it had no effect. Eventually, Kyle even started mocking the restaurant itself, calling it a dump. When confronting him proved futile, the staff turned to Sarah, the owner, for help. Surely, if Sarah, as his boss, gave him a firm warning, Kyle's behavior would improve. However, it became painfully clear that this assumption was far too optimistic. "Kyle's attitude is going to destroy this restaurant from the inside," the staff pleaded. "Please, Sarah, you need to be firm with him." But Sarah's response was simply, "Can't you all just get along?" She claimed to have warned him, but judging by Kyle's continued freewheeling behavior, it didn't seem to make much of a difference to him. Her words were not a big deal. What's with that guy? How much longer does he need to keep mocking everyone before he's satisfied? The complaints in the staff room grew more frequent. Their frustration was directed not only at Kyle himself, but also at Sarah, for allowing his behavior to continue unchecked. Sarah's no better. Does she think talent makes up for a broken personality? I listened silently from a distance, sighing softly to myself. I thought that it can't be helped. Kyle's performances had brought in more customers than ever, pushing the restaurant to its busiest peak in history. Given that, letting him go wasn't an option. Sarah was likely balancing the risk of removing Kyle against the need to sustain revenue. Struggling with a decision amid this tension, a prominent local politician reserved the restaurant for a dinner gathering. It was the most significant event in the restaurant's history. "Let's give it our all," Sarah declared, her eyes alight with determination. In contrast, the staff's faces were clouded with unease. Demoralized by Kyle's behavior, we were no longer in a state to work as a united team. Could we really satisfy such an important guest? Could we even pull this off? Despite those doubts, we had no choice but to move forward. Despite the tension, the staff pressed on with preparations for the big day. They reviewed the menu, procured ingredients, and worked on the necessary prep. Even Kyle surprisingly started practicing the piano every night after closing. Can you believe it? That overconfident guy is actually practicing. You'd think he'd just say, "This is easy for me," and call it a day. Watching him from the shadows as he focused on the piano, we whispered among ourselves. The sound of his playing echoed through the empty restaurant. Every time he paused, he muttered, "This isn't good enough." His dissatisfaction was clear. He repeated the same phrases over and over, striving for perfection. Maybe he's just clumsy, but deep down, he might be serious about his work, someone murmured. The others nodded silently in agreement. Gradually, the tension directed at Kyle softened, and the hostile atmosphere began to dissipate. Sensing this shift, Sarah visibly relaxed, exhaling a small sigh of relief. But then disaster struck. On the day of the politician's reservation. "Sorry I'm late," Sarah said, bowing slightly as she arrived after being delayed by another task. She then asked, "Has Kyle arrived yet?" But the staff's uneasy reactions made the answer clear. Exchanging glances, someone hesitantly replied, "No, not yet." Since that morning, no one had been able to contact Kyle. At first, we thought he might have overslept due to nerves, but every call only resulted in the same lifeless dial tone. After waiting a bit, they tried calling him again, but there was still no response. In other words, Kyle had gone completely silent and unreachable. "You've got to be kidding me. Why now, of all times?" Sarah's already pale face lost all its color, turning as white as paper. Her lips quivered, and for the first time, her usual cool composure was replaced by visible agitation. The ticking of the clock sounded unbearably loud, as if accusing us of our helplessness. "Let's just finish the preparations for now. Kyle might show up eventually," she instructed in a weak voice. The staff nodded and resumed their tasks, though anxiety lingered in the air. As time passed, there was still no word from Kyle. Even the messages sent through the app remained unread. Out of concern, Someone even went to check his apartment, only to find it empty. Sarah had muttered earlier, "Why now, of all times?" But perhaps it was precisely because of the situation. Crushed by the pressure, I suspected Kyle might have fled. Sarah retreated to the staff room, where she literally held her head in her hands and slumped to the floor. Instead of sitting on a chair, her usual commanding presence was nowhere to be seen. It wasn't just her. The other pianists who had been asked to step in as replacements were similarly despondent. When asked if they could perform in his place, they all shook their heads in unison. "The piece scheduled for today is Lammy. It's far too difficult. None of us could handle it on such short notice," they admitted. The room filled with an oppressive sense of panic and hopelessness. Then what about a different piece? Someone suggested, trying to salvage the situation. But Sarah firmly shook her head. For this reservation, the politician had made a specific request for a piece in advance. It was the Oriental Fantasy by Islami. It was the promise of having a pianist skilled enough to play it that had secured the reservation, she explained. What would happen if the politician found out the performer was missing? What if we switched to a different piece to suit our convenience? It was easy to imagine the disappointment and potential fallout. "We have to perform Islami no matter what," Sarah whispered, her words heavy with despair. Surely their hearts were filled with a sense of guilt. They probably felt sorry that they couldn't step in as substitutes. No one had any suggestions to break through the impasse. The room sank into a suffocating silence, weighed down by hopelessness. In that moment, Michael's words resurfaced in my mind. "Just do your best at your own pace." His kind voice had pulled me through countless struggles. Is there something I can do? If ever there was a time to repay him, wasn't it now? Michael was gone, but the restaurant he cherished was facing a crisis. Wouldn't saving this situation be the ultimate way to repay my debt? To motivate myself, I clenched my hands and steeled my resolve. Then, lifting my head, I walked over to Sarah. "Sarah, I'll borrow the outfit." Sarah spun around, her movements so sharp they seemed to slice through the air. The other staff stared at me with disbelief, but I was completely serious. Fixing my gaze on Sarah, I asked, "If someone can play Islami, there won't be a problem, right?" As Sarah nodded, I added more to my words. "I can do it. The person who can play Islami is standing right here," I declared. Her response was drenched in disbelief. Normally, Sarah would have scolded me for saying ridiculous things, but now she seemed willing to grasp at any straw. She silently watched as I headed toward where the outfit was kept, making no move to stop me. The other staff were the same. Though they looked at me with skeptical expressions, not one of them stopped me. I quickly changed into the outfit Kyle was supposed to wear. Luckily, since our builds were nearly identical, the outfit fit perfectly. Not too tight, not too loose. "This feels nostalgic," I murmured unconsciously as I glanced down at my hands. Whether they didn't understand the meaning or simply didn't hear it, I wasn't sure. What I did know was that no one responded to my words. There was still a bit of time before the politician arrived. Having finished my preparations, I sat down at the piano and lightly pressed the keys. When was the last time I played? I had assumed my skills might have faded with time, but to my surprise, my body seemed to remember. My fingers moved effortlessly, and a wave of confidence surged within me. However, there was still one issue. The thought of performing after so long as Alex, the pianist, filled me with an overwhelming sense of nervousness that bled into my playing. I wanted to perform. No, I had to perform, but I wasn't eager to show my true identity. As a compromise, I decided to wear one of the decorative masks used as part of the restaurant's decor and perform under the pseudonym. Finally, the moment of the performance arrived. The food had been prepared flawlessly, and the politicians were smiling. Judging by their reactions after tasting the dishes, they seemed more than satisfied. Everything had gone well so far, and I couldn't afford to ruin it with my performance. After taking several deep breaths backstage to calm my pounding heart, I stepped out in front of everyone. The politicians looked thrilled at the prospect of hearing the requested piece. Sarah clasped her hands together as though praying for my success. From the kitchen and dining areas, I could feel the eyes of the staff on me. Yet the moment I started playing, none of that mattered anymore. All that existed in my world were the black and white keys in front of me. Like magnets, my hands were drawn to the piano, hitting the keys one after another. I felt as though I were in a concert hall. This time, however, I wasn't in the audience. I was on stage, bathed in the spotlight and surrounded by the sound. As I was creating, I felt an overwhelming sense of comfort. Yes, I loved playing the piano this much. Realizing this, I felt tears welling up in the corners of my eyes. Was it sweat trickling down from the heat of the mask, or tears stirred by a swirl of emotions? I couldn't tell. Before I knew it, time had flown by, and I had reached the final notes of the piece. A brief moment of silence followed as I stood up to bow. The politicians erupted into thunderous applause. I noticed their eyes glistening with tears, streaks of moisture running down their cheeks. I did it. It went well. Having fulfilled my role, I let out a sigh of relief and quickly retreated backstage. Even as I left, the applause continued to echo for quite some time. If it hadn't been for you, I don't know what would have happened. Truly, truly, thank you. After the restaurant closed, Sarah approached me and bowed deeply. Her usual stern face softened. Her lips relaxed, and her eyebrows tilted in a gentle curve. It was a fresh expression for her, one I hadn't seen before. Smiling faintly, I replied, "I just did what I could." "I'd like to ask you something," Sarah said, straightening up as she spoke. She probably wanted to ask why I could play the piano, and more importantly, how I managed to perform such a challenging piece. Her next words confirmed my guess. At this point, there was no reason to hide it. I decided to share my background. Actually, I used to attend a music conservatory. After graduation, I spent some time performing with a team overseas. What? Sarah wasn't the only one who shouted in surprise. The chefs, waitstaff, and even the other pianists joined in with their astonishment. Feeling a bit embarrassed by their praise, I scratched the back of my head and chuckled. I'm just glad I haven't lost my touch. I silently hoped no one would notice how warm my cheeks and ears had become. I had been learning piano since I was a child. It wasn't because my parents forced me into it. It was my own choice. I had been captivated by a professional performance I saw on TV and couldn't get it out of my mind. I want to play like that, I had declared. That excitement never faded, no matter how many years I practiced. The joy I felt with every improvement, the praise I received from my parents and teachers. I became increasingly engrossed in the piano. By the time I was in high school, I had a clear goal: to become a world-class pianist. My first step toward that dream was to enroll in a music conservatory, and I was fortunate enough to pass the entrance exam on my first attempt. At the conservatory, I honed my skills alongside talented peers, working hard and ultimately graduating as the top student. After graduation, I joined a performance team in Paris, living my dream as a pianist. I remember vividly when things began to go awry. It was when our team welcomed a new member, Ryan. He had been a classmate of mine at the conservatory, also majoring in piano. Ryan was brought in as part of a new initiative to include piano duets in our performances. He hadn't been directly scouted by the team. He applied through an open recruitment process and was selected. Well, if Alex knows him, there shouldn't be a problem, the team members reassured me with those words. But deep inside, an indescribable sense of unease lingered in my chest. Ryan was undoubtedly talented, having graduated as the second highest student in our class. However, his personality posed some challenges. He was fiercely competitive, envious, and prone to extreme behavior. In truth, Ryan wasn't supposed to be second. There had been another brilliant pianist between us, someone whose skill was unquestionable. From the start of our time at the conservatory, the three of us had been known as the top three. The other top student and I fueled our rivalry with healthy competitiveness, focusing on improving each other's skills rather than obsessing over rankings. We would sometimes listen to each other's performances, offer constructive advice, and incorporate what deserved praise. Ryan, however, was a bit different. It seemed he had the mindset that he alone deserved to be number one, and he would crush anyone in his way to target the second-ranked student. He resorted to underhanded tactics such as hurling insults and even hiding essential sheet music, relentlessly sabotaging them. Eventually, the second-ranked student dropped out of the conservatory. Perhaps Ryan had planned to target me next, but before he could, graduation arrived, and I narrowly escaped his grasp. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine ending up on the same team as him. After graduation, it was easy to imagine the kind of treatment I would face. And sure enough, he used every possible tactic to try and drive me out. He spread false rumors, claiming that Alex had a bad reputation in school, that I didn't deserve to be valedictorian, that I had cheated my way to the top. He sent anonymous emails to my work account, filled with insults like, "You're terrible, and you're a burden to the team. Just quit." After enduring this for a year, my mental health deteriorated. I began having nightmares where Ryan appeared, hurling insults at me, leaving me unable to sleep. The thought of facing him gave me severe stomach aches before practice, nearly every time. Even when I managed to show up, my heart would pound uncontrollably during performances. My hands would sweat, and I'd fumble the keys. My physical health began to suffer alongside my mental well-being. I really am just a burden now, aren't I? Ryan's words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't stop blaming myself. Eventually, I left the team. I spent a few days packing my belongings, preparing to return to Japan. The night before my departure, I decided to have one last meal in Paris and headed to a high-end restaurant. I wanted to leave with at least one good memory. By chance, I happened to meet a Japanese person there. We hit it off quickly as we were both dining alone and preparing to return to Japan soon. That person turned out to be none other than Michael, the former owner of this restaurant. He was in Paris training as a chef. Though he had started late in life, he was determined to return to Japan and open his own restaurant. He told me about his vision: a restaurant with live piano performances instead of background music. "Enough about me. Tell me about yourself," Michael asked. I hesitated, my gaze darting away as I muttered, well, at the time, I hated even admitting that I had been playing the piano. However, under his persistent gaze, I gave in and reluctantly answered, "Piano." Michael's eyes lit up with excitement. "A pianist from that team. I can't let someone like you slip away. Once you've had some time to settle your thoughts, would you consider joining my restaurant?" he said, speaking rapidly, almost like a machine gun. Me, play piano again. I wanted to refuse, but I thought, I've come this far because I love the piano, and my feelings might change over time. Before I knew it, I was nodding in agreement. The next day, I returned to Japan and began working at his restaurant. Though I never played the piano again while Michael was alive, performing recently and receiving applause gave me a small boost in confidence. A few months later, the story of the mysterious ace spread after a restaurant interview, sparking interest. There were even people trying to scout Ace away to other establishments. Today, someone else had arrived asking to meet Ace. Sarah approached me, holding out a business card. It bore the name of a famous music company, along with the person's name, contact details, and photo. When I saw it, my eyes widened. It was Ryan, the very person who had driven me out of the team. Back then, I had been too exhausted to feel anger, but seeing his face again, a fiery rage ignited within me. "If you're too busy, we can decline," Sarah said, but that burning feeling fueled my resolve, and I replied immediately, "I'll meet him." Wearing my costume and mask, I entered the meeting room. Sure enough, it was Ryan. His face was unchanged despite the 5 years that had passed. That only made my anger burn brighter. He had no idea I was glaring at him from behind the mask. Instead, he smiled brightly and said, "It's an honor to meet you," while rubbing his hands together. What an insincere smile. Surely there was something dark lurking beneath it. "What brings you here today?" Sarah asked politely. Ryan eagerly pulled out a company brochure and handed it to us. "We would love for Ace to join our company as an exclusive pianist," he declared. I slowly reached out, took the brochure, and began flipping through its pages. Seeing my reaction, Ryan seemed to believe he had secured a favorable response and began talking rapidly. "Someone with your talent shouldn't settle for a mere restaurant, Sarah. Don't you agree? It's a waste to keep him isolated here." Even though he was here for business, his words were incredibly rude. It seems that a person's true nature is something that rarely changes. It's like watering a withered flower. It simply won't come back to life. "You arrogant jerk," I thought. "Even as an adult, your rotten core hasn't changed." "Ryan," I shouted, pulling off my mask. When my face emerged, Ryan froze, his jaw dropping as if it might unhinge. His wide eyes silently asked why I was here. I briefly explained what had happened after he drove me out of the team. Ryan, now pale, stammered in a hoarse voice, "That's impossible. Why are you playing the piano again? I made sure to crush you and implant that trauma." It was true, because of Ryan, I couldn't bring myself to play the piano for a long time. But the love I had for the piano and the years of practice were ingrained in me. It all came rushing back when I performed at the restaurant. "There's no way someone like you could destroy those feelings," I shot back. Damn it. Perhaps startled by my outburst, Ryan stumbled out of his chair, ready to flee. "You're free to leave," I said, "but just so you know, this conversation has been recorded." Hearing that, Ryan glared at me, but didn't respond, leaving the room with slumped shoulders and an air of defeat. His eyes lacked their usual menace, and there was no sense of intimidation. "What was that all about?" Sarah asked, shrugging and chuckling at the now quiet room. I smiled faintly and replied, "Who knows?" Naturally, Ryan's actions were reported to his company. A week later, after their internal investigation, the results came in. Ryan, it turned out, had been removed from the team about a year after I left due to his arrogance. After returning to Japan, he joined his current company in a scouting role, but his condescending attitude earned him a poor reputation. Recently, he had achieved a notable accomplishment, successfully scouting Kyle away. The reason Kyle hadn't shown up that day was because he had already gone to join Ryan. However, after causing multiple scandals involving women and treating others with the same disdainful behavior he'd shown at the restaurant, Kyle's contract was quickly terminated. Where Kyle is now, or what he's doing, remains unknown. Meanwhile, Ryan's other problematic actions came to light, leading to his dismissal for damaging the company's reputation. As for Ace, my name began spreading further. I was invited as a guest performer at concerts and even played for welfare facilities and municipal events. Despite these opportunities, I had no intention of going independent or joining another company. I believed that making my piano famous and helping the restaurant thrive was the best way to honor Michael's memory. One day, after returning from a guest performance, I heard the sound of piano music at the station. Ah, a street piano, I thought, and walked toward the source. To my surprise, it was Kyle playing. A crowd had gathered, captivated by his performance, with murmurs of admiration. "He's amazing. What talent!" A small camera was set up next to the piano, suggesting he might be live streaming. There was even a sign with what appeared to be his social media handle. So, he had chosen a different path, but continued playing. When he finished the piece, applause erupted from the crowd. I joined in, clapping my hands with the others. "Any requests?" Kyle asked, smiling warmly. A young boy in the front, who looked about kindergarten age, called out, "Acorns." I smiled at the happy mood as Kyle, still smiling, said, "Okay," and started to play. He appeared to be a much more modest version of himself now that his haughtiness had subsided. He was also much better at the piano than he had been at the restaurant. Now he was someone else entirely. I just pivoted on my heel and left without saying anything. I bowed as I went, keeping up my practice to avoid losing to him.